Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My clock is showing that it is noon, so we will go ahead and get started. My name is Dr. Jennifer Bonzracki, and I serve as a staff member within Academic Affairs at the Kansas Board of Regents. As we begin our time together this morning, I'd like to remind everyone to mute their computers and place any questions that you have in the chat function. With those courtesy reminders out of the way, it is my pleasure to introduce two special guests. First, I would like to introduce Nancy Crable. Nancy is a member of the Math Pathways Task Force and is the Assistant Director of Liberal Arts and Sciences Advising Center at Wichita State University. In addition to her primary role as an academic advisor, Nancy also coordinates pre-medical advising and programming at WSU. Nancy has worked alongside us at KBOR to plan today's session in supporting our advisors across the state. So thank you so much, Nancy, for all your help with this project. Today's facilitator is Dr. Melinda Anderson. Dr. Melinda Anderson, a distinguished expert in academic advising and seasoned professional in implementing math pathways. Dr. Anderson is currently the Executive Director for Network Engagement at Achieving the Dream and has previously served as the Executive Director of NACADA, a premier association dedicated to student success through academic advising in higher education. Her extensive experience in various administrative roles, including Interim Associate Vice Chancellor for Student Success at Elizabeth City University, and Associate Dean of Undergraduate Studies and Director of University College at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington, make her an ideal facilitator for our session today. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Anderson. Again, I encourage you to use the chat function, which I will monitor and share questions with Dr. Anderson as the program permits. Now I will turn the program over to Dr. Anderson.
Thank you so much, Jen, for that warm introduction. And Nancy, so good to see you. We've been able to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing in Kansas. And so I'm just happy to be with you this afternoon as you continue this very powerful and important work across your state. And so we'll get started with I always like to know who's in the room. So if you can just share your name and the institution that you're representing as we kind of get started. So then we can start building community that way. I love virtual settings because of the accessibility, but then I'm also wanting to make sure that we remind ourselves of the power of community. So thank you guys for being able to drop that in the chat. So thank you. They're rolling in. We have 155 participants with us so far. And so we are going to make sure that we try to build in that time for community. Next slide. So as those things are rolling in, we'll just talk a little bit. Again, today is designed for community. And so wanting for us to be informal, right? But I have this slide deck. So we will just kind of get through some of the points of order, and then we'll pull the slide deck down, and then we'll be able to share. So please keep dropping in the chat where you're from. What we wanted to do was just to review a little bit of what has been learned thus far as you guys are moving through this process around math pathways and supporting your students and the work that you're doing on your campus. Talking a little bit about the way forward, which will be our community building Q&A time together. And then next steps, how do we move forward from here? When I think about this work that I started in terms of math pathways in North Carolina, it was very similar to this, right? We had some policy changes, some process changes, and then we started talking about, okay, so how does this inform our practice and how do we move forward? And so having these conversations are important and powerful for us to understand not only the work forward, but then, of course, keeping the student in the center of that work. Next slide. So we thought it would be important to just do a quick review for those who may be joining or just need a reminder, Gateway Math Course Pathways. What does this mean? How is this going to change the way that our students think about their time with us, their journeys forward through their degree programs? And then ultimately, the work that I'm doing now at Achieving the Dream, really focusing on the impact of community vibrancy. How is this work important to the ultimate goal of getting any degree, which is how are you able to move forward either your career, your chosen work? How does this impact generational wealth? And so all these things are ultimately connected and important to why we are even thinking about how math pathways can be transformed in order to support students in their time to degree, getting through the courses with the power of the learning that we want them to have, right? So not just getting through math, but understanding different pathways in order to be informed, to feel empowered, to feel confident in their work, in their math pathways. And so here, adapted from the webpage, in terms of what our Gateway Math course is, the 3 math pathways, just wanting to remind about elementary statistics, contemporary math, and college algebra. And I had the opportunity to listen to some of the sessions that have been had. And I really do like the way that the breakdown of, designing the pathway, right? Then thinking about multiple measures in terms of how we help students get to that pathway. And then thinking about the co-requisite support that would be laid within that course. And so here, just a reminder of what those pathways are, and then how you guys have then chosen to move forward. Next slide. I thought it was also important to remind about the timeline. When I first talked to Jen and Nancy, it was like, okay, so what does this timeline mean in terms of where everybody is, in terms of how this work is moving forward on campus? And so just wanting to set a reminder here about how the pathway timeline has been informed. And so right now in the fall, right now in the spring and summer, moving into the fall, professional development, designing co-requisite support, and then moving forward eventually into your selection of a gateway course with co-requisite support being built in, and then moving into fall 2026 for full implementation. I think what I find powerful about this particular timeline is that just to remind that we're in the beginning, right? But towards the middle. And I know that sometimes people find themselves like, I feel like I'm still at the beginning. Or sometimes people feel like, oh no, we're at the end. This is a full-blown implementation. And so what this tells me though, in terms of where you are, is that we're at the place for lots of questions. We're still at the place for conversations and some dialogue, which is why we're having this conversation today. Next slide. After the pathways has been determined, multiple measures will be used to be able to help support students determine what is the best pathway moving forward. And as an advisor, as we were doing this work, the question, they start to bloom, right? What process are we going to use? How does this change the way that we have been working with students? How does this tie into the major choice? What if they change their minds? Undeclared students, all those other elements do become topics of conversation. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that today, because I know that there probably may be some still outstanding questions. In terms of co-requisite support, and then the work that I was able to do working closely with math faculty, what does this look like for our campus? And I believe that, and so Jen, please correct me if I'm wrong, this conversation, right, about which option makes sense for my campus, which option makes sense based on how math faculty are coming together to design and support the math pathways that have been created or designed for their respective campuses. And so is it supplemental course? Is it tutoring? Is it a boot camp? Is it a compressed course section? And so what I do like about this ability for choice for campuses is based on the students that you're serving, based on math faculty, based on what they know that their students need, having some choice in this process. And Jen and I are getting this thing down. She can see my head nod for the next slide. So I really do appreciate that, Jen. What I wanted to just show with this particular slide, I think it's important that when we start talking about math pathways, especially if they're based off of a framework that's been used across several states, across several campuses, what I like about the data center model um, are the principles that it's designed by. And so I just wanted to highlight this again for especially the purpose of this conversation. Institutions implement structural and policy changes quickly and at scale, yes, and right. The first principle is students, regardless of college readiness, enter directly into math pathways aligned to their program of study. Because we know that time to degree is important. We know that the cost of education is rising. And so these things are important for us to keep in mind when we talk about overall student success goals. And so we know that students, when they complete their first college level mathematics requirement, is important and critical to their persistence as they move forward to their degree. When we think about the third principle, strategies to support students as learners, is where our work steps into play around how holistically, how are we designing what that support looks like. And I've seen math pathways work even embedded into particular communities around majors. And so this work of holistically supporting students with these strategies to support them as learners is a very powerful principle that I've seen implemented very well across several campuses. And then, of course, the fourth principle of instruction incorporates evidence-based curriculum and pedagogical practices. And so working closely with math faculty, I've learned a lot about what that process looks like and what is needed for students to be successful. And so I always think about these moments of having an opportunity to learn even more about how to support students in their educational processes beyond just what my work is as an advisor.